You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. You're doing more than listening to Head to Head. You're watching Head to Head. And I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So let's see. Already we got a chat in here. That didn't take long. It's always nice. So, let me see. Let me just get it to send over here. All right. So in the chats, I basically put, like, as kind of a funny opening question. I said, will Daryl like the Acolyte with episode 3? Will Eric dislike the show? Let us know in the chat. So to that response, Ted said yes. Rising. And almost everyone will have disliked episode 3. All right. I don't see anything yet. So nothing's coming through on Twitch yet. Although we do have our faithful Twitch viewers, which we're actually happy about. So yeah, I mean, there was good and bad. Like I said, I mean, for me, it was kind of funny because from what I had read, like the day after, because keep in mind, these things come out on Tuesdays, like Tuesday night. And then we basically had the whole week or whatever. Now, usually I try to watch it maybe a day or no more than 2 days before our show because I want it to be fresh in my mind. I mean, even though I'll take notes on it, you know, still, it's kind of like, I remember one time we were doing a show where I took notes and then we did the show like 4 days later or something like that. And even though I was looking at the notes, I'm like, it was disassociated from me, basically. Like, I'm reading the notes that I put down, but I wasn't, like, it wasn't just a part of what I was feeling. It was almost like I was just reading some other dude's notes and commenting on them.
You felt like the acting in Acolyte. Got you.
Actually, I thought it improved this episode.
Well, no, I mean, we'll get into that, but I'm just talking about it in general. You know how I was talking about the wit and acting.
Yeah, in the first 2 episodes, that was, even though I said that I had liked the show overall, I had to admit we had prequelitis. It's like,
yes,
you're kind of going, okay, you got one dude who's like learning English while acting his part. Yeah. You got another, where they weren't. It was almost like they just got the scripts the day before or something. It was really interesting. David says, hello, gentlemen. Happy Father's Day, Daryl. Boy, are you some we should know?
I'm a
Star Wars
figure.
Day.
My father figure.
I was gonna say, are we making a special announcement on the show today?
Save it to the end.
Yeah, exactly. Did you unleash the Force in the last 9 months, or do we have a little Acolyte on the way? All right, I'll stop.
Yes, thank you.
But what I was trying to say was, so on Tuesday, right, this episode drops. And the first thing, there was this rumor, right, that there was just going to be this big thing that was going to really change, like, everything or whatever. So then, I'm reading the reviews, and it was kind of a mix again, where a lot of people really hated it or something like that, and then there was other people who, were kind of like, okay, they weren't necessarily happy with where the story was going, but they didn't think it was necessarily that bad. So naturally, I'm reading this, and I think I even texted you earlier in the week where I was just kind of like, this might be the turning point for me. Because again, I'm not really necessarily married to the show, right? I'm just pretty much expecting the worst and hoping for the best. And I think that was one of the things, what we determined was part of the reason why I actually enjoyed the first 2 episodes was like, oh, I expected it to be really bad. Now, again, there are bad parts of it. We talked about that last week. If you guys missed the review of last week's show, go back and check it out after, of course, we're done with this one, if you happen to be watching live. If you don't, then, maybe pause here, go watch our first 2-episode review, and then, come back or whatever. So, yeah, I was sort of bracing myself for, the worst or whatever. But I actually, I found some things improved, honestly, from the first couple episodes. I thought, like, the acting was a lot better. Now, part of that is because it was almost an entirely different cast of people. It was kind of like, when it goes back to our main characters, I mean, the acting could very well nosedive and become wooden again. But I mean, at least for this one, they got it. But I also felt that the set still felt kind of small. Like they still don't have that larger scope that we were hoping for, like what you got with really almost all the other series except for maybe Obi-Wan. Because I remember that was a complaint that we had of Obi-Wan too, is that Obi-Wan felt a little claustrophobic a lot of times. And what I find odd about that is the fact that this show is actually shot, on practical sets. They're not really over-relying on the volume, so it's a little weird to me that by not using the volume, the sets feel a little bit smaller. But, again, the series so far, I mean, it's not what I had hoped it would be, because we were talking about we wanted to see, the Sith side of things. We wanted to maybe, have things like flipped around, like what we saw with the Jedi. We wanted to see that with the Sith. We thought that it was going to be more of a Sith-centric show. But, I didn't hate it, really. I mean, a lot of the things that people had issues with, I mean, of course, the agenda started to come into this episode a lot more than it did in the first 2. But they didn't really, I feel like, focus a lot on it. I mean, there are some funny things that, that I was watching going, really? Like, I'll give one away right now. May starts this fire, right? They're supposed to be in this stone and metal cave. Why is this thing going up like it's rice paper?
Yeah, like it's made out of paper mache.
Yeah, or like drywall or something. I'm like, that right there just took me like, I mean, I get what they were going for emotionally or whatever, but it was just like they could have conveyed that, I think, and not been so blatantly, out of it. But I know a lot of people were complaining about the whole thread thing and all that stuff. But I mean, to me, that was almost like you'd have, I mean, it's almost like the variations of religions that we have in the world. It's like, people, even Christian themed ones, there's a lot of different, denominations and all this other stuff. And so it really stands to reason. In fact, that's one of the things I thought was kind of cool, because it's really opening up the universe and showing, like, look, here's this other group of witches that have the Force, but they're not necessarily plugged into the Republic and the Jedi and all that stuff. So they have their own name for it. They have sort of their own rules for it. And, I also thought it was cool that one of the things that, Lucas had brought up and everybody is how, and you and I have talked about this too. We've actually joked about this quite a bit, where, the Jedi would go around taking all these kids. And you're kind of like, I mean, is that, like, are we going to gloss over that part of things? And I actually like that this episode dealt with that a little bit more head on. Like, look, they're all, hey, we have the right of the Republic to come in and basically take your children or whatever. And it's sort of that dichotomy and, how that works. So, again, I still think that this show could be executed a lot better. I'm really hoping that we get into more of a, like, swing back. I mean, I get what they were trying to do with this episode, but I almost wish this had been the first episode, if they wanted to lay context to what was going on. And then, 1 would be 2 and 3 would be, 2 would be 3. That's what I was sort of hoping for. But yeah, I mean, overall, again, I didn't hate it. I didn't absolutely love it, although I liked a lot of things about it. I certainly thought there were a lot of improvements over the first 2 episodes. But I'm really hoping that it gets back to the Sith a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm going to say that, I enjoyed this episode way more than the first two. I think this was better storytelling, in my opinion. I
Absolutely.
think so from a storytelling perspective, and this is how I kind of want to hinge at least my thoughts. I want to kind of categorize some things. So I want to put like the story, I want to talk about the cinematography, and then the I guess the acting, like those are kind of like my three uh focal points. So with the story, I think it was great because now we know what happened on Brendock. We know, okay, this whole backstory between May and Osha and why they're at odds and why she has such a vendetta against the Jedi and things of that nature. So I think that was great. I think the reason why I think this her rationale is sound. Is because she grew up with a certain way of life and this is what she wanted to do, and it's that jealousy, like, hey, we're supposed to be together, we're twins, we're supposed to do it. And she's like, no, I don't want to do it. Like, well, what do you mean? It's like we've always done things. So I can understand. It's almost like two best friends who decide to part ways and go their separate paths. And it's kind of like, well, how do we I'm so dependent on the other. And
Right.
I think that was a nice addition. I love the acting by the young ladies. Well, actually the young lady. I mean, it's probably just one, and it just I mean,
Yeah,
unless
you
they're
know
actually
what?
are twins.
I've wondered
I
that
don't know. I don't
myself.
know. I
I
don't
know
know if
I
they're
didn't
actually twins or they're actually just.
I
But I
didn't
mean,
look
I'm
that
thinking
up.
because they're kids. Because
Yeah.
they're kids now too. I mean, do you find a kid because that kid looks awfully like you know May and Osha, so to speak. So
They
I
really
mean, that could
did.
be it could be a computer thing. I
I
mean,
know, like, did they just de-age? I mean, it I was wondering that myself because, you know, it was frightening. Now, what they
yeah,
could
it
have
was pretty
done,
good.
they could have split the difference because 'cause they've done this in a couple of films too. What they've or even some TV shows that I've heard, where what they'll do is, like, they'll find somebody. They've even done that in Star Wars, where they'll find somebody that looks similar, and then they'll just tweak it in the computer. So it's not like a
Hmm.
full-blown, like,
Right.
de-age or something, but they'll, like, take, like, say, a kid, right? And then give that child digitally the features of, the heck is her
Of the
name?
older
Yeah, Amandla, is that
Amanda, Amanda, yeah,
Amandla, yeah.
I know the name he
The one
hate.
that yeah, the name I hate.
He she who shall not be named.
Yeah.
but 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 yeah, I think from a story perspective, I think it was good. I mean, of course, you definitely saw the agenda, but fortunately for me, it wasn't so egregious that it's
It
like,
wasn't
okay,
shoehorned in.
yeah, it wasn't overly
No.
saturated.
I
It was
was
just
I was
it was fun.
shocked. I was
Me
totally
too.
shocked because,
I
once
was
I
like,
had
okay,
seen some reviews and I heard that, I'm like, "Oh, here we go." But I mean, yeah, when you see
right,
it, it's not
yeah,
it's not overt, it's kind of part of the story. It's like, okay, because I mean, I'll tell you, I expected to hate these witches, like this whole coven thing, but I
mhm.
didn't. Like I'm
No,
like,
I thought it was cool, and when I found out that they were witches, I was like, oh, hey, that's interesting. I like the fact that they call it a thread because, and much to your example that you used earlier, Eric, with the Christian, like different people have different names for the same God. So, so some people may refer to the son as Jesus, some people might refer to him as Allah, some people might refer to him as, whatever. And so even in this, the forces is known to them as the thread. And it makes sense because a thread generally binds everything together. If you making clothes, I mean, that's kind of what a thread does.
mhm.
That's what the horse does. And so it's
I
essentially you're
like the
talking
whole,
about the
like,
same
you
thing,
pull the thread and it's kind of like, I mean, there was a lot of
unravels,
really
and
cool things that they did with that.
yeah, I mean, and so I thought that didn't bother me at all. Um, what did now I will say from the the cinematography part of it all, it still looks like a fan film to me, and I
Yeah, I
hate that.
know.
And
I know it
especially
does. It
when they especially when they spent $180 million on this budget. Like it's almost like a $200 million budget, and then I'm like, where did you spend the money? I mean, aside from a couple of effects that you might have done, I mean, everything looks like a fan film. Like we could have shot this and just
Yeah,
put it out there.
somebody brought up the fact that even with like the makeup, right? Like um their name like Cora or something, the woman on the left that we're looking at right now.
Oh, the one with the spine. I mean, the
Yeah,
little things coming
little
over her
like
head. Yeah,
mall-like things, yeah. So
yeah.
they were pointing out to where I think it was actually on this side of the face. So she would have like part of the tattoo would go down, but like the skin texture stops here. It's like no, you would just
Uh,
have the rest of it go. It was almost like
yeah,
there were things that people were, picking up on. Like, okay, the average person might not pick up on this, but when you look at it,
yeah.
and it basically comes down to, I think that they said that per episode it's like 22 million or something. Now, granted, I get it, the dollar's weaker, inflation, so I mean costs have gone up. But I do remember something along the lines of The Mandalorian only being like 8 or 10 million an episode. And look at all that they've done with that, and it's like I mean with
Yeah,
22
exactly.
million, even if you adjust for today's economy, it's like you should at least be hitting what The Mandalorian's doing.
Exactly. And the other thing is, like I said, the cinematography of it all, like it's lackluster. I've still the dialogue is terrible. I think the dialogue in this was better, and I get it. The fact that you know, uh, I'm gonna pull a David and just call him Squid Game. Squid Game over here, is I
Well, he
get it.
was
He's
way
learning the
better.
English. He was way better, but he's learning the English language, and I get that. So, and he didn't have a whole lot to say, in this
No.
episode. So I thought that was
But I
that was
mean
cool. They
he
mainly focused on
basically
the female talent.
right, which was smart actually in this case, especially the story they were going to do. But I mean, I thought that it was cool that yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll just call him Squid Game. He basically he did essentially, I thought, delivered his lines a little bit more emotion, conviction. Like I actually believed it was a character saying something rather than
Mhm.
almost like a guy has like a little earpiece or something and somebody's just feeding him the line and he says it. And I mean, I liked the character of Saul. I mean, I thought that Saul was actually, because he's Qui-Gon-ish. I mean, that's basically what he is.
Mhm.
He's like the High Republic's Qui-Gon. So it's not like it's
Yeah.
groundbreaking and we haven't seen it before, but within this context, I thought it actually worked. And but a lot of the criticisms that you had in the first two episodes were, I mean, completely valid. And him not actually really speaking English is a big part of the reason. So I thought that in this one, even though he didn't have a lot of dialogue, I thought he delivered it. I thought it was delivered a lot better.
Yeah. I think now on to let me see. Some of the like I said, some of the production shots, like, when they showed the sky, when they were showing some of the landscape, I don't know, it just didn't look sharp to me. It looked pixelated or grainy or something like that. It just didn't have any sharpness to it. And I was that kind of took me out of it as well. I think that going back to the story, I love seeing the dichotomy because obviously Cora is probably more of the male in the relationship. So she's kind of wants to have she's more stern, she wants discipline, she wants all these type of things. Whereas, the other is more like, okay, she's the nurturing, the mother, just wants to do that type of thing. And that's okay. I get it. The problem I have with the story though, two main problems. Now you brought up the whole stone thing as far as which I had a problem with that as well. But two of the biggest things that I had an issue with. One is like they completely stole Anakin's thunder
Yep. That was
because
another
the
one. I
fact
didn't want
that
to bring that up in the intro, but now that we're into the
oh
episode, yes. We can we
yeah, it's
can
like
get into
okay,
that.
yeah, like okay, well, she's like, well, I carried them, and she's like, well, I created them, and it's like,
Mhm.
okay, so you're Palpatine now, so now that kind of I won't say discredits Anakin, but it takes away the specialness of Anakin because that was kind of his thing. It's like he was the chosen one because the Force just kind of impregnated Shmi. So that was one of my big issues. Other big issues. Now in episode 2, we saw Torben. He was all racked with guilt, took a vow of silence and everything. What the heck did he even do?
Well, then that's something. It's a little
Because
bit
we
of a
never got
preview,
that.
but you know how we always do our what I'd like to see next thing?
Yeah.
Well, I'll give away one of them. One of them is, so he's obviously willing to drink a vial of poison because he was so racked with guilt, right? I want to see
Mhm.
more of what actually unfolded, because there was actually a couple of little Easter eggs, or I guess you can consider them Easter eggs. I think that essentially what was happening was the fact that there were certain things, like there were certain looks they were giving each other. There were certain things I noticed that were happening off camera that were subtle. I think there was more going on than what we were seeing in this episode. Like, I think it's almost like if you look through something through a paper towel tube. You're seeing it, but you're only seeing it from a very narrow perspective. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to refer back to this incident now. And maybe either through flashbacks or just exposition, we might learn a little bit more, because I had the same thing. Like, I don't really see anything. Like, why is this guy so like guilt ridden that he's
Yeah, he was possessed half the time, and then it was cool to see that he was actually a Padawan at that moment. So to kind of see that he went from a Padawan to this super powerful master, where he's basically floating with the force field around him. I mean, that's pretty cool. I
yeah.
like that. I think I thought Saul handing her the lightsaber was stupid.
I
'Cause,
had that in my notes as well. That it's like, okay,
that's almost like a police officer come. Oh, you want to see my gun? Here,
yes.
like,
And it's
like,
funny that you say that.
who
I
does
had that
that?
same thing in my notes. I swear, I actually have written down. That's like giving a 5-year-old a gun and saying, "Isn't this cool? Check it out." Like a
Yeah.
loaded gun with the safety off.
Or at least take the clip out and the round out of the
Right,
chamber.
right,
Please.
right. And I mean, that's what I thought. And it's just like, these guys are being a little bit careless with that. I mean, that was one. And another thing, probably like the last thing, like everything else I was either okay with or I really enjoyed. But the last thing that really took me out of it was that stupid song they were singing.
Oh, one of
Yeah, it's like
of
one,
two,
we're
yeah.
many, da, 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 da. It's like, it was just so stupid. I'm like, what? Who wrote
Yeah,
that?
exactly.
Like,
It's supposed
it's
to be like
like,
some weird chant, and it was
it
just
is, but it just came off so stupid. And I'm just watching this
right.
going, you really, I mean, in my opinion, I think it made up for a lot of what we saw in episodes 1 and 2. And again, I understand, I'm going to say it like this. I understand the critic, because I do what I usually do, especially because there's so much time between when the episode airs and when we review it. I watch all the main reviewers. I watch Critical Drinker, John Campea, Harloff. I watch, Star Wars Theory. There's like probably 2 other ones. So I watched everybody's review on this thing. I also like to do it too in case there's something that I miss. But yeah, I mean, I understand the criticisms of this thing, but at the same time, I don't know. I was just, like I said, I expected, just from everything that I heard, going, oh man, this is the one. This is the one that's gonna like send me over the edge. And I'm watching it going, oh man, I actually kind of enjoyed this episode.
That's kind of how I felt too. I was like, oh, okay, this one was actually cool. Yeah, I mean, and so that's the other one. So the fire, going back to the fire thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once again, just saying, you have a whole coven full of witches who all use the thread or the force, and they all get wiped out together, like in this one moment. And it's like they didn't even, it didn't like they were even burned or anything. It's like,
I don't.
did something fall over them, or
No, I think
like,
that
and if
something
that was the
happened.
case,
I think that what we're seeing here is this is what, because we don't know
Maybe
as
this is
the
the
audience either.
Torben. Maybe this is the Torben thing.
Yeah, I think that what we're gonna find out. I mean, if I'm just guessing, I think the Jedi may have had something to do with their demise. Like, I don't know if they went in and, because it doesn't
Yeah,
look like there was any discernible, like they were hacked
yeah,
up
like
with
nothing
lightsabers.
fell on
Like,
them. They
nothing
didn't.
to
Yeah,
see
they
here,
didn't. Well, nothing fell on them, obviously, because it would have still been on top of them. That would have the
Right?
case. So that didn't happen. They didn't look burned at all, or like
No.
they were, scorched or anything. It's not like they look like Anakin or anything. So I'm kind of like, well, what the heck happened? Now, that would be hilarious if it was like, okay, this is our chance to kill them all. And then we can take the girls because now they're orphaned and now there's no resistance against it. Because remember, they did that whole Jedi test to them to see, like, okay, and they were kind of set up to fail it. That was the plan by them. It's like, hey, if you just guys go in there and just bomb the test, then you guys are good. And
That's why it was
you
great when
know,
OSHA was like, "That's not a mountain," and they're like, "Ah."
yeah,
How do you know?
yeah, exactly.
I thought that whole test
Yeah,
scene I thought
how
was
they
very, very well done.
yeah, how they found him out. And I
Yeah.
like how they kind of kept it consistent because that's the same way they did Anakin too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to see if you can sense what this is.
Yeah,
So those are
no.
those are some of my major issues with the episode. I mean, I think they're pretty glaring. However, outside of that, I think the episode was really good as far as giving us the backstory, giving us um and to your point, Eric, that you made earlier. Yeah, I think that is kind of unfair that the Republic gets to, just because a child shows promise or has the potential for to use the Force, that it allows the Jedi to just automatically come and sequester them. I think that's kind of unfair because, like, what if they don't? It's like they don't have a choice in the matter, and you're almost forcing them into a life that they
Well,
may
that's
not want.
why. See, that's where, like, Qui-Gon, the way he handled it, I think is what we're almost meant to think is what the norm is, right? Like, oh, here, let me give you a blood test. Do you want to do this? Because he was even warning Anakin, like, look, I mean, it's not all fun
Sunshine and
and games,
rainbows.
basically. Yeah, exactly. He was trying to warn him a little bit, and I think that one of the issues is that we don't know how the High Republic did it, though. Like, because
Right.
maybe that's one of the changes Yoda made, and
Hmm.
maybe he's like,
But they did give her the blood test, so I thought that was interesting. I thought that was funny
I
too.
thought that was
They brought,
cool. Some of like another Easter egg that I thought was actually pretty sweet was when OSHA started drifting toward, Kalnaka and, like, looking at him fixing the ship. It was almost like that. Oh, you want to be a, what do they call him, mechanics or something, or
Mech Tech or something like that.
yeah, something like that. Basically, a mechanic, and that was sort of foreshadowing that OSHA does have an interest in mechanics, and that's
Hmm.
why when she does leave the Jedi Order, she basically, becomes one. So I
And
thought
it's
that
funny
that
because
was
that's
cool.
that's an Anakin thing too, because he was like a tinkerer with that
Mm-hmm.
type of stuff too.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. All right, so now we got a bunch of chats here, like a lot, which is no surprise. All right, let's see what you guys are thinking. All right, Ted says I don't normally notice bad writing, but this is a standout of dialogue that swayed from moment to moment. But the worst was teasing lore breaking whether they're actually do or not eventually. What does that mean?
Yeah, I need to clarify that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, he has a follow up, though. He says, I'm not a fan of subverted expectations or even teasing that element. Just tell me a story where the Jedi are good and good at what they do since it's the High Republic. Well, that actually brings me to, if I did have any problems, again, I have to go back to my review a little bit of 1 and 2 because in spite of its issues, which, I mean, personally, it sounds like you're sort of thinking the same thing. Not everything, but a lot of the problems that episode 1 and 2 had, they either have fixed or they're beginning to fix. Like, there's a glimmer of hope, like, oh, that maybe that's an anomaly, right?
Mm.
Gets off to a bad start. Again, we'll have to see when the primary cast comes back. It's like, oh, there's that wooden dialogue again. But aside from stuff
Right.
like that, the only real issue that I had was just because I love the whole murder mystery vibe that they're going for, and a lot of those elements. So there's a lot of the story that I actually love. And then it's kind of like when they did this in episode 3, I love the fact that they're actually giving us context, because I think that honestly, if I were to go back and watch 1 and 2 now, I would probably enjoy it more because I understand more about what's going on. And so even though this isn't necessarily the story that I actually expected when we were reading about this for the last year or two, I'm becoming invested in it now. Like, I'm like, you know what? I'm on board with these characters. I'm on board with this stuff. But that said, even though it is a tail end of the High Republic, this is supposed to be the height and zenith of the Jedi. And where they're mildly being portrayed as bad guys here. Now, on one hand, I like the fact that you're seeing their whole code and all that stuff from an outside perspective, and that they're exploring some of these elements. And I think that's good. But I don't know. In some ways, I almost think they're overdoing that part a little bit. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's where I think the
Well,
agenda's coming in a little bit too.
I think part of it is because they're trying to show, like, there is a moment, like you said, this is the last 100 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. So we're starting to get into a darker time, so to speak. Um,
And maybe the Jedi
and,
just
and
aren't handling it correctly.
yeah, and I think that's just what
Mm.
they're trying to show. I think they're trying to show, like, okay, and the High Republic, like, yeah, they were like, spot on. They were with it, but then now there's something else that's coming out. And I think there's this rise in the darkness that's causing some things to kind of happen with them. That's kind of like, all right, things are shifting, and we're trying to operate the same way that we always have, but um there's a new thing coming out. And then once again, I have to give my sports analogy, but it's kind of like, back in the probably like the 70s, 80s, and early part of the 90s, you had like big football. It was pretty much run the ball, pound the ball, you throw it up every now and again. And it's like, okay, you got a big guy who's going to make the touchdown. But now when you look at the game of football, it's all about speed. It's about spread offense. It's about spreading the field out. It's now you don't know who to key in on, and it's kind of makes it difficult for a defense now to just zero in on something. The same thing I feel like that's kind of happening in Star Wars or in this is that the Jedi are used to kind of having everything, like you said, Eric, kind of in a narrow scope. They can kind of funnel everything in. Now it seems like they're losing control of that somehow, and they're trying to retain it the same way that they always have, but they're not adapting fast enough. And I think that's why certain things are getting past them, that they're like, okay, because
Yeah,
when she ran up on, when May ran up on her, she's like, well, who trained you? It's like, because she realized, like, okay, well, now, on one hand, maybe she knew, I don't know if she knew it was May at that. I gotta know, did May take the mask off at that point? But even if it was still like, does she know is the difference between May versus OSHA? So if she knew it was OSHA, if she thought it was OSHA, well, she know who trained her. Saul trained her.
well,
But
here's
if
the
it
thing.
wasn't Saul,
That's the
I mean,
thing,
if it
because I
wasn't
don't,
OSHA, then
and
now she has to
maybe,
wonder, like, who trained May.
yeah, well, I'm kind of blanking out on this. Did they see two girls there? I guess they did. 'Cause then they all thought that May died in the fire, kind of like what they said in episode 1 and 2.
Yeah, because that's what they said. Well, where's your sister? Bring your sister down too. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, it's
that's
like,
when May came down, because OSHA went
mhm.
out first.
Well, yeah, maybe somebody should have taken him out of the room if they wanted to hide him that badly. It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I'm
They
thinking,
were trying to get him out of there, but then I think that they kind of popped in So they try to cover them up, like,
And I
guys, they're
mean,
Jedi. You think they
well,
can't sense?
right, right. Well, to your other point, though, if the High Republic weren't so the High Republic, I'll put it like that, I could buy that theory a little bit more because more so than at any other era that at least we've seen depicted, one of the things that makes the High Republic so interesting is the fact that they are being attacked on all sides at all times. You know, that's why they have a bunch of bases. That's why, I mean, they're still not quite military, but they're definitely more military than the Jedi in the prequel era. So it doesn't seem like they would be, unraveled or kind of losing it that quickly. I mean, I think it would be interesting because I know Leslie Headland is sort of jockeying to do an Old Republic project next. That's one of the things that she's interested in doing. And it would just be nice, I don't know. Like, I don't know how much of this is her and what she's trying to do, and maybe this is why she chose this specific time in the High Republic. Because in some ways, I think that it would be nice if we could just have a Star Wars project where, the Jedi are good and the heroes of the story, and, just kind of make it simple. Like, everybody's always, it's almost a cliche now to sit there and make the Jedi flawed and they're the problem. And it's like, oh, they're not the white knights. There's a little bit of gray in there. It's like, I don't know.
You're into the David world. You want the black and white.
Well, at least make it to where it was, because remember, when George Lucas is writing this, it's a fantasy, it's a fable. That's the whole idea behind a fable. It's not, you are black and white. I mean, if you look at all the fairy tales, sure, there's inference and things like that. But, essentially, it's...
You got a good guy and a bad guy.
Good guy, bad guy, moral of the story. That's pretty much where it lives. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying you have to make every Star Wars project like that, but now I almost think they're trying to go too far the other way in a way. And even the original trilogy showed the cracks in the Jedi armor, to be honest.
Well, I would say like the original trilogy was more like good versus evil. I mean, it was clearly defined as good versus evil. I think the Jedi have always been good versus evil. I think that's always been a thing. I think the problem is that, and this is the reality of a lot, is that everyone who thinks they're the good guy, like everyone thinks that the other person is the villain. You know what I mean? Like the Sith think the Jedi are the villain and they're the good guy, and that's the reality of it all. It is just really more so up to us to see who do we see as the good guy and the villain.
But again, this is my problem with it. It's fantasy. It's not reality. These don't have to be documentaries. That's the whole idea.
That's true. But I also think that's also what makes the story more compelling, and that's where you can get the drama, is because you still have to make a moral decision. And I think that's where your heroism becomes more prominent, is because, not to butcher this quote, but it's like, it's something to the effect of, if you're trying to, if you're going to be good, always be good. Like, in other words, you always have to put your ideals of morality first. And I think that's what happens, is that when, and the Sith are, and of course, the oppressors are always going to challenge that. And I think that's kind of where you have to be, that's where the real heroism, lies, is when you have to look beyond that and still do what's right. And I think that's kind of where you see, but you need to see the hero struggle with it. That has to be a struggle for the hero.
100%.
And oftentimes that's the struggle.
But again, if you look at the way that Lucas depicted things in the prequels and the original trilogy, it's a perfect balance of all that. He did all that. He showed the struggle without overly vilifying the Jedi, because that's the cool thing to do now, it seems. You look at the novels. The novels were humanizing the Empire, but they didn't make them seem good. They just showed you from their perspective. They still showed, hey, this is what's actually happening. And and even on the, the other side, they definitely showed some of the struggles that they would go through, but it wasn't like you were trying to change. The problem with this series is it seems like it's actually trying to, in some ways, change the nature in a way. Like I want to, right, the narrative. There you go. Like, I'm trying to make the Jedi more of a bad guy in this.
Almost like a Rogue One, where you start to see, like, okay, you have to kind of get your hands dirty in war type thing.
Well, yes and no. I mean, look, we've seen the Jedi getting their hands dirty plenty of times. But, even in Andor or Rogue One, because it's really more Rogue One. I mean, Andor expands on it, of course, but with Rogue One, it's still like, okay, and this has more in common, too, with the George Lucas version of the Jedi. Anytime the Jedi were doing something that seemed a little either in a gray area or just bad, it was because they were maneuvered into it by this malevolent force that essentially, that was part of the grand plan. He needed to smear the Jedi's reputation in order to turn the people against them.
Right.
Here, they don't really have to do anything. They just, and again, I mean, I know I just said earlier in the episode that I think it was actually cool that they explored the whole, hey, we're coming to take your children, whether you like it or not. And
well, I mean, I think that's just the culture. I mean, that might have just been the culture at the time, or just like how we think. I think that there's some laws over in the Middle East or in other countries. I think like, oh, that's unfair. Well, that's because I'm westernized. You know what I mean? Like, I
right.
think
Well,
that,
sure. Right. Yeah.
and I think that's just part of what, for them, that's perfectly normal for them. And I think,
well, no, you hit the nail on the head, because of the old Republic. They're saying, but the Republic, and they're like, hold on, we're not in the Republic.
Right. Exactly.
It's like, that works fine for the Republic, and if you're in a Republic world, I'm sure it's okay for you to come and take the children. It's not okay for you to come and take the children. I mean, that's, it's, in case you haven't noticed.
Right. We're kind of in this whole fortress on a mountain.
Right. It's like, I understand.
Burns, like,
I get it.
Like rice paper, but that notwithstanding.
Exactly. I mean, you're not gonna Herbert my kids. I'm just
Hey there, Mushlion.
Hey there, Mushlion. All right, let's get back to some of these chats. So Darth Maul joins us. He says, needs more Gungans. we need Darth Jar Jar. He all goes on to say he's got a few here. He says, I think that's not taking away from Anakin because those were just witches. Now, that's something that I actually was thinking of when I was putting my notes together, and I wrote that down, where you could actually take it from the thing, right? Because the whole idea was Plagueis was creating or trying to create life, and the idea was either him or Palpatine or somebody that manipulated the Force to essentially create Anakin. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, unbeknownst to them, the same thing could have been happening, 100 years before. It's like a separate thing. It doesn't, you could say it doesn't necessarily, but here's why I say that it does. It's because the idea that was presented by Lucas himself and then carried on was the fact that this was a special thing. It hadn't been done, period. It wasn't really necessarily just like a thing. It was like, yeah, he was the chosen one, and this was a special thing that happened in the Force.
Yeah, it's an anomaly type thing.
Yeah, like a one-of-a-kind thing. I mean, I think that what the argument is that, no, it's more like a dyad, where it only happens once every whatever. But even if you make that argument, we're only 100 years before the Phantom Menace. Now...
Well, a dyad still means you would have to have two. So it's like, in Anakin's case, where's his other half?
Well, no, I don't mean that. What I mean is the fact that it's an anomaly and that it only happens every once. Okay. Yeah, right. Basically, the occurrence. That it's not a regular thing. But, my whole thing is, even if it wasn't a regular occurrence, like, Halley's Comet comes like once every 75 years or whatever, it's still like, but yeah, but we're only talking 100 years before here.
See, but honestly, just to be blunt, I think this is a bunch of crap because, quite honestly, I think they're just using that as an excuse for their woke agenda. Because
absolutely. They're almost implying that these two chicks like scissored each other and created like this.
Well, that's I think that's what. But here's the thing: it's like you have two girls who like are running around and a coven full of women with. I mean, that's just like this is not the mascara, where you got like the Amazons, from Wonder Woman. So it's essentially you're trying to say like, okay, you wanted to replicate or be able to have children, but you can't because you don't have a man. So now you're using the thread to now create life and create a child. Whereas in the Force, you still have that same situation because there still was no man. Even Shmi said that, well, there is no father. But it's done in a way where it's like, okay, this is almost like the virgin birth of Jesus. If you're going to take it from
a one and done kind of thing, exactly.
A one and done type of thing.
One and done type of thing. Very unique thing. To fulfill a certain prophecy, by the way.
Exactly. That needed to be done for the galaxy to right itself.
Yes.
The Force is basically righting its wrong in a way.
All they're doing is cheapening that part of the story. Because there's no reason for this. There's no and that's the problem. That's where the storytelling falls apart. Is that it and again, I mean, where the story is going, everything, I can overlook it only because it's really, I mean, I don't know. There's still, like 5 episodes or whatever left, but okay, fine. That it just explains, how they got there or whatever. It might not necessarily factor too heavily into things, and if it doesn't, I can probably overlook it and just be like, all right, whatever,
Because once again, because I just, if you're powerful enough to create life, you're powerful enough to like possess the mind of a Padawan. You're powerful enough to do all this, and it's a gang of you all. Like, how did you all just magically die just in one moment? That right there, you know what I mean?
Well, and again,
or not be able to sense anything.
I know, and I think that's going to be explained. I think that this is one of those typical film techniques where, we're looking at it through the lens of, say Saul or some character. Or, whoever was basically in the fire besides Osha. And it's like you come out and it's like, oh, look, everybody's dead. I wonder why. So maybe there'll be a flashback or there'll be something that explains that. I hope so, too. Because they could be going for one of two things. Because remember, they were almost taunting the Jedi, too, when they said, oh, we didn't know there was a settlement here, and she was, like snorting, all-knowing Jedi or something like that, I mean, which I thought was hilarious. But the only other thing, if they don't do, like, some reveal, right, which, honestly, I think that that's going to be it, because, right, why did Torben kill himself?
Right.
I feel like we're talking about Epstein now. It's like, but why did Torben, why did he do that? Why was he so willing to drink the poison? As soon as he came out of the trance, he's like, remember what you did? Yep. And, down it goes. Something went down that was their fault. Now, the other thing that I could say that they could either incorporate into this, or maybe they just wanted to do this, would just show, the Jedi are a little bit more powerful than what you thought. You're thinking, oh, yeah, I could do all this or whatever. And then you find out that, you taunt these guys. Because remember, the Jedi are always going to come in peace and try to be cool about things until you don't let them.
Mm-hmm.
And when the sabers and everything comes out, or they have to start using their... Because don't forget, the High Republic era Jedi are insanely powerful. I mean, they hinted towards that in the first 2 episodes. Aside from Indara's like, oh, look, I just got stabbed. And, I mean, granted, it was in the heart, but still, that was one of your criticisms. Like, well, she should have been able to stop that, but sneak attack or not, it's like, hello, Force. But that aside, just going by the novels and the comics and all that stuff, the High Republic Jedi are they're insanely powerful. They make the prequel era Jedi look like Padawans.
Yeah.
So, the whole Coven of Witches, they're not going to be a match for them, no matter how powerful they think they are. But, we'll see. So anyway, the whole, the Anakin the Witches saying, Darth Maul was saying that was my take anyway. Okay, so David comes in, says the episode was way too slow. Yeah, it's kind of like with Andor with you. The Harry Potter stuff was uninteresting and compared to watching the League of Shadows do their ceremony in Batman Begins. This sucked. The mother wasn't good either.
Yeah,
I get
I
it.
mean,
I guess,
I get
but
it.
I disagree. First of all, I think if you're talking about the character, I don't know. I mean, because I thought that her performance and I thought the character was actually pretty cool, honestly. I thought it was somebody different because here's the thing, and then I'll, turn it over to you, is that it would be very easy to copy the Dathomir witches. The Dathomir witches, are basically, they themselves are, they morphed into the Night Sisters and, through the lore and all that stuff. But it's essentially the same thing, right? So it would have been very easy to copy them, but they didn't. And I think that there was a lot of subtleties there. Again, I guess you have to know the lore a little bit more, but I don't know. That's my take on it anyway.
Yeah, I think I think her name was Laura. Was it Laura? Whatever.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to remember the actress.
No, the character.
I was like
the mother.
Yeah. Well, it depends on which mother. The mother, I
that's
think
what I mean.
he's talking about.
The mother is the black one.
Yeah.
Versus the
yeah, Guinan.
Yeah, man, that's
dude.
That's exactly who. No, I'm like, who does she? I could not figure it out. Yes,
dude. The whole time, I'm like, man, it's completely Guinan. 100%. You could have put Whoopi Goldberg in that, and it wouldn't have changed the character a bit.
Oh, that's gonna make me laugh so hard.
Yeah, that was like the first thing that came to my mind as soon as I saw her, like the way she's dressed and like everything. I'm like, holy crap, it's a Star Wars everything. Just her disposition, demeanor, like I mean the whole shot, man. It was just
But I think she was done well just because you have to juxtapose it to her lover, where that character is more of the father like figure, where there's more the disciplinarian, wants things kind of done and decency and in order type things, and she's trying to be all nurturing and let's let them make their own decision. Let's let them have Cheerios. I mean, Cheerios for dinner if that's what they want. See,
and that's why May is such a brat.
Exactly, but then it's also, I like the fact that she made I like the emotional connection she had with Osha because she's like, well, what do you want? This is essentially like, okay, you have to choose a path, and if you leave, am I going to see you again? She's like, no. Like she was just really honest with her, like, no, you're not.
Yep.
So you really got to be sure this is what you want to do. I'll let you do it, but you really got to be sure because I don't want to, hold you back. And I think that,
well, that was actually a non-cliche thing that was something that I didn't expect. Because if you look at how protective she was and trying to keep her away from the Jedi and all that, and then when she was making the choice, she's like, all right.
Well, yeah, because she kind of eventually realized, like, okay, I don't want my child to be miserable.
Well, but that's not the usual direction that they go with in a story like this, though.
No,
but no, you're right. I mean, that's the take, obviously, but I appreciated that part.
Yeah, I like the conflict between the two because if you want to ground things and make things kind of more realistic, I mean that's kind of what happens in a lot of households. It's like you have a kid and it's like, okay, well, one's like, no, they need a firm hand. It's like, well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe we need to allow them to kind of explore and figure things out for themselves so they can learn. And so there's always that conflict of how to raise children, and I think that's but of course they're doing it with their own agenda spin to it. But yeah, I think it was. I don't have a problem with their acting. Now the Harry Potter stuff, like you said, that was uninteresting. I mean, like the things that they did were cool. I mean, as far as how they were using the force, I mean, everyone kept, I was watching a lot of the social commentary on the episode, and everyone's talking about like, oh, they kept saying that the thread is not a weapon, but then they kept weaponizing it. And I was like, well, in my opinion, though, like, I get what they're saying. However, it's almost kind of like a baseball bat is not designed to be a weapon. The force of the
Right.
thread is not designed to be, but you can use it as a weapon.
Well, the other
So
thing that's, I mean, if you look at just their little philosophy behind it too, right? I mean, they basically talk about, instead of like, how do they put it? It was something like, it's not about good or bad, it's about who wields the power or something like that.
yeah,
So it was interesting to me to see not just the variations on the thread itself and everything, but it's basically their philosophy behind it, which I thought
hmm
was cool. And again, I mean, look, the music, I mean, other than that stupid chant song, the music was actually pretty cool. I mean, one of the things that I was afraid of that I didn't really feel. Now, I know some people felt this way, but it still felt like Star Wars to me, even though I agree with you that it felt a little bit more like a fan movie at times. It still had like the Star Wars vibe, and that, with a story like this, that's very difficult to do.
hmm
Very difficult
I
to
agree.
do. So, all right. So here, let's see what we got. Oh, Darth Maul brings up a good question. He says, wait, is this episode's coven supposed to be this show's version of the Path of the Open Hand? Path of the Open Hand. They were, forgot what it was in. It was, they were like some rogue missionary group or some, I don't remember if they were witches or not. Uh, it's like doing the stuff from memory. They had like a leader that I think that they called Mother. I can't remember what book that was in, what thing it was in, but it was. I could see where you might actually think that. I don't know. It's possible because much like Filoni, much like those other guys, um, you do have a big fan in Leslie Headland. Like Leslie Headland is a self-professed Star Wars nerd, right? She's absolutely into all the expanded universe stuff, all the other things like that. So, and that was one of the things, honestly, that made me excited for this project initially. But
hmm
I would not put it past her to, maybe without lifting that exact storyline or thread, um, but actually make it influenced by that. I mean, it's certainly possible. He said, you want our
Well, the
thoughts on
path of the
this,
open
and
hand.
Ted said, good
Okay.
question. So, you got some info?
Yeah, the path of the open hand is remember as the faithful about the Rowe family was an extremist missionary order and cult that existed on the planet Diana uh, during the High Republic era,
Oh
led
yeah,
by
I must have.
Alicia Zeveran. Alicia Zeveran, also known as the mother who claimed to be a prophet. They believed that no one should use the Force, especially the Jedi Order. They believed that using the Force was abusing it and it would cause death and disaster throughout the galaxy.
Yeah, I forgot when it was, but when they introduced it. But it's very much possible, right? Because it is a High Republic era thing, and who
hmm
knows? Maybe we find out more about that, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's
because
the
they never
thing.
did mention it, so we
No,
don't
they
know.
didn't. They didn't. They didn't. Maul also goes on to say, maybe it was a combination of Anakin being virgin birth and the high midi-chlorian count that make him the chosen one and special. He says, but now I feel bad for bringing up midi-chlorians. And then Ted joins in and says the M word. Well, see, that's the
Ooh,
thing.
said the M word.
Yeah, you said the M word. M is okay. You just want to avoid that next letter. But they're even getting around it now, right? See, again, like softly rebooting, they're calling it M count, right? Nobody's using the word. I think it's hilarious. Nobody's saying midi-chlorians anymore in the actual show. It's all M count, got your M.
It's like you got B vitamins and your M count.
I know. I mean, it's crazy. It's just a blood
Vitamin
test. Look,
C.
we just want to make sure you get some vitamin C. We don't want you getting scurvy on the way back to the thing. All right. So now David's coming out of a box here. He says the episode completely sucked. Anything positive was minimal. Also, May's decision to burn everything was badly written. That I agree with. I get that in the end she becomes evil, but to go from I'm sad, you're leaving, to death to all, if I can't have you, no one can, was a big leap. I agree, except, her character in this actually reminded me, there was a Macaulay Culkin movie that came out like in 93 called The Good Son. That's completely what she reminded me of. If you go and watch The Good Son, watch Macaulay Culkin's character, because he was a little bit of a sociopath, and it's not a big leap, because what they're trying to establish is that May either is a full-blown sociopath or she has sociopathic tendencies. And one of those is, it's not that they actually care about a person, they just want what it is they want. May wants Osha around her. And it's not based on, I'm going to miss you if you leave or anything. No, it's